Before we start, make sure you subscribe to the channel, because what you're about to hear is not just a story. It's something that sounds almost unbelievable when you first hear it. A story about survival, desperation, choices made under pressure, and a life that changed direction in ways I never could have predicted. I'm 32 now, but 3 years ago, I was not living, I was just trying to stay afloat. And when I say that, I don't mean it in a poetic way. I mean it in the most literal sense. Every day felt like I was one step away from everything collapsing completely. No family, no financial backup, no safety net. Just me, a shrinking bank account, and time moving faster than my ability to keep up with it. I grew up in a quiet town in Ohio. Nothing special ever really happened there. Cornfields, small grocery stores, and people who mostly stayed in the same place their whole lives. My parents worked in a factory, double shifts, night shifts, overtime whenever it was available. They never complained, but I could see the exhaustion in them even when I was young. We didn't have luxuries. We had stability in the most basic sense, food on the table, a roof over our heads, and a belief that hard work would eventually lead somewhere better. I tried to believe that too. After high school, I went into community college. I didn't have some grand dream. I just knew I didn't want to live the same exhausted life my parents lived. Eventually, I tried nursing school. I thought maybe that would be my way out, a stable career, something meaningful, something that would give me direction. But life doesn't always wait for plans to finish. My mother got sick. At first, it was manageable. Doctor visits, medication, small changes in routine, but slowly, it became clear she needed full-time care. And I made a decision that, at the time, didn't even feel like a decision. I left school. I told myself I would go back, but I never did. Days turned into months. Months turned into years. I became her caregiver. My world shrank into hospital visits, prescriptions, and watching someone I loved slowly become weaker. And then she passed away. I still remember the silence in the house after that. It wasn't just quiet, it felt empty, in a way I didn't know a place could feel empty. 6 months later, my father died too. A heart attack. Sudden. No warning. One moment he was standing in a grocery aisle, the next he was gone. And just like that, I had no one left. No parents. No siblings. No real direction. Just grief, bills, and time that suddenly felt heavier than it should. I sold the house. It wasn't even a choice at that point. I couldn't afford to keep it. I paid off what I could, boxed up what remained of my life, and moved to Charlotte with 2 suitcases and a checking account that held $312. I told myself it was temporary, that I would get a job, rebuild, start again. But rebuilding sounds simple until you're actually the one trying to do it. At first, I applied everywhere. Restaurants, retail stores, clinics, offices, anything that would take me. But every place had a reason to say no. Gap in employment. Overqualified but outdated experience. No recent references. I started to feel invisible. Not rejected. Invisible. There's a difference. Rejection at least acknowledges you exist. Invisibility feels like you don't. My savings disappeared faster than I expected. Rent was due, food got expensive, job interviews turned into routine disappointments. And soon, I found myself sitting in a small apartment that smelled like old takeout and anxiety, staring at an eviction notice taped to my door. 30 days. That's all I had left. I remember sitting on the floor that night, not crying at first, just thinking, trying to calculate what I had done wrong, trying to figure out where the path shifted so sharply that I ended up here. And then I realized something uncomfortable. I hadn't made one big mistake. It was just a series of small ones, mixed with bad timing and life not caring about my plans. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept scrolling through job listings, anything that might change my situation. And that's when I saw it. A listing that didn't look like anything I had applied for before. live-in companion needed for elderly gentlemen. The pay was high, higher than anything I had seen. Room and board included. Flexible responsibilities. Kindness and patience required. That last part stuck with me. Kindness and patience. Not degrees, not experience, not credentials. Just human qualities. I stared at it for a long time. Long enough that the decision stopped feeling logical and started feeling like survival. I called. A calm voice answered and gave me an interview time. Thursday morning. I showed up wearing the only professional outfit I still owned. My hair tied back, resume printed at a public library because I didn't even have a printer anymore. When I arrived, I thought I had made a mistake. The house wasn't just big, it was overwhelming. Tall gates, long driveway, perfect lawn. Everything about it looked like a different world entirely. A world I had never been part of. A man opened the door and led me inside. The inside was even more surreal, quiet, polished, expensive in a way that didn't need to announce itself. And then I met him. His name was Carter. He was 85 years old, frail in body, but not in presence. There was something steady about him, something that made the room feel less intimidating, even though I was clearly out of place in it. We talked for a long time. He asked me questions I didn't expect, not just about work, but about life, about my mother, about what I valued, about what I had lost. At one point, he asked me what my mother's favorite book was. I said it without thinking. To Kill a Mockingbird. He nodded like that answer meant something deeper than I understood at the time. At the end of the conversation, he offered me the job. No hesitation, no second interview. Just a simple sentence. Start Monday. I should have felt relief. Instead, I felt uncertainty. But uncertainty doesn't stop survival. So I accepted. The first weeks were structured, predictable. I woke him up at the same time every morning, prepared meals, managed medications, read to him in the afternoons, took him on short walks when he was strong enough. His world was quiet, but not empty. There were books everywhere, music in the evenings, long pauses where he would just sit and think. And slowly, I started to understand him. He wasn't just an old man waiting for time to pass. He was someone who had lived a full life and was now observing what was left of it with quiet awareness. Months passed. My financial situation changed completely. For the first time in years, I wasn't worried about rent. I wasn't calculating grocery bills in my head before checking out. I wasn't living in constant fear of the next emergency. But life has a way of shifting in unexpected directions even when things start to stabilize. One afternoon, Carter asked me to sit with him in the sunroom. He looked different that day, more reflective, more serious. He told me something I didn't expect. He said he missed feeling connected to life, not in a dramatic way, not in a desperate way, just connected. He explained that watching life pass from a distance felt like losing something slowly instead of all at once. Then he said something that changed the direction of everything that followed. He asked if, once a week, I would be willing to perform something for him. Not in a way that crossed boundaries, not in a way that involved anything inappropriate. He described it as movement, expression, something like art. At first, I didn't understand what he meant, but over time I realized he wasn't asking for anything physical in the way I initially feared. He was asking for presence, for energy, for something that reminded him of life moving instead of fading. I didn't answer immediately. I left the room and walked for a long time that day. I thought about money, about survival, about the stability I had finally found, and I thought about how fragile all of it still was. Eventually, I agreed, not because I was fully comfortable, but because I was still trying to survive. The first time I did it, I was nervous in a way I can't fully explain. The room was quiet, the lighting soft, music playing in the background, and I moved. At first, it felt unnatural, like I was performing for someone else's perception of me. But something shifted. The more I moved, the more it stopped feeling like performance and started feeling like expression. Not for him, not for money, but for something internal I hadn't accessed in a long time. When it ended, he simply nodded and thanked me. And then he paid me. That was the moment everything changed. Not because of the money itself, but because of what it represented. Security, consistency, a future that didn't feel like it was collapsing every day. Over time, this became a weekly routine. Saturdays, always the same structure, always respectful, always contained within clear boundaries. And slowly, I stopped seeing it as something strange. It became part of life. I saved money, paid debts, eventually bought a car, then, later, a condo. For the first time in my life, I owned something that didn't feel temporary. But emotional complexity doesn't disappear just because life becomes stable. There were moments when I questioned everything. Moments when I wondered who I was becoming. Moments when I looked in the mirror and felt like the person looking back at me had lived more lives than I could explain. And yet, there was also gratitude. Because without that chapter of my life, I don't know where I would have ended up. Carter's health declined over time. Eventually, he passed away peacefully in his sleep. At his funeral, I learned things about him I never knew. People from different parts of his life. Family. Legacy. A life far bigger than the room I had known him in. And then came something unexpected. In his will, he left me a final gift. Not just money, but acknowledgement. Recognition that, in his final years, I had been part of his life in a meaningful way. After the funeral, I left. I didn't stay in the mansion. I didn't stay in that world. I returned to my condo, my real life, and I started again. Therapy helped, work helped, time helped. But what helped most was understanding something simple. People are shaped by survival, and survival doesn't always look clean. Today, my life looks normal from the outside, but I carry the memory of that chapter with me not as regret, but as something complicated and human. Because sometimes life doesn't give you perfect choices. Sometimes it gives you options that all come with consequences, and you just choose the one that lets you keep going. And that's exactly what I did.